In the dimly lit hangar of a hidden asteroid base, over 100 starfighter pilots from across the galaxy stood before Hank Henry. The air was thick with tension, the walls echoing with the soft hum of idling spacecraft. At the front, Hank, a grizzled veteran whose face was etched with the lines of countless battles, surveyed the crowd. His voice, when he spoke, was both grave and inspiring. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for answering the call," Hank began, his eyes sweeping over the assembly of pilots, each one a volunteer bracing for a mission from which they might not return. "You all know why we're here. The People's Republic's capital ship, the Justice, has committed atrocities that shake the very foundations of our moral universe." He paused, letting his words sink in, the weight of their task hanging heavy in the air. "This ship," Hank continued, pointing to a holographic image of the Justice that flickered to life behind him, recently obliterated every living soul on the world of Thera 3. Men, women, children, none were spared. Their crime? Daring to defy the Republic's decree. Murmurs of anger and dismay rippled through the crowd. Hank raised his hand for silence, and the room fell quiet once more. "We've gathered here to make a statement," Hank declared, his voice hardening with resolve. "The Republic believes they can crush the spirit of the galaxy under their boot. Today we show them they are wrong. Today we strike at the heart of their oppression." A younger pilot, a woman with fiery eyes and a tight braid of red hair, stepped forward. "Commander Henry, what's the plan? How do we even approach a beast like the Justice without getting blown to bits?" Hank nodded to her, acknowledging the question. "A fair point, Lieutenant Mara. Our approach will be in two waves. The first, led by our bombers, will target their shield generators. We've got precise coordinates for their weak spots." He gestured to the hologram, which zoomed in on specific sections of the ship. "Once the shields are down, our fighters move in. It'll be tight and messy, but that's where we do the most damage." Another pilot, an older man with scars crisscrossing his face, chimed in. "And the nuke? Who's carrying that big farewell?" "That'll be me," Hank replied, his expression somber. "I'll fly the final run, armed with a nuclear-tipped torpedo. We get one shot at this, and I intend to make it count." A hushed reverence spread through the room. The gravity of Hank's decision, the finality of it, was not lost on anyone. "How do we cover you?" another voice asked, this one from a young pilot whose uniform still looked too new, too clean. "With everything we've got," Hank answered firmly. "Keep them too busy to notice me slipping through. It's a one-way trip, but if it means ending the Justice's reign of terror, then it's worth it. Remember, we're not just fighting for ourselves, but for those who no longer can." The room erupted in a chorus of assents and affirmations. Pilots thumped their chests, nodded to each other, a united front of determined warriors. "Get to your ships. Brief your crews. We launch in 1 hour," Hank concluded, his voice a rallying cry. "Today we bring justice to the Justice." As the pilots dispersed, moving with a purpose that bespoke their readiness and resolve, Hank remained at the front, staring at the hologram of the ship they were about to engage. His heart was heavy, but his determination was unyielding. This was the culmination of his life's work, his final stand against a foe that had taken too much from too many. The hangar buzzed with activity, a hive of rebels readying themselves for battle. Hank finally turned and walked towards his own ship, his steps resolute. Today they would strike a blow for freedom, or die trying. The hangar bay of the asteroid base buzzed with an urgent, somber energy as pilots suited up beside their crafts. Each fighter, bomber, and gunship bore the unique marks of numerous skirmishes and rapid modifications, each alteration a testament to the ingenuity and desperation of the rebel forces. The air was thick with the smell of engine oil and nervous sweat, mixed with a palpable sense of determination that echoed off the metal walls. Hank watched as Lieutenant Mara strapped herself into the cockpit of her sleek fighter, the paint scarred and burned from previous battles. Around them, other pilots engaged in similar preparations, some quietly muttering prayers, others sharing fierce, wordless hugs with their ground crew, the unspoken acknowledgement of the danger they faced hanging heavily between them. "Hey, old man, you keep your head down out there." "All right," Mara called out to Hank, her attempt at lightheartedness not quite masking the tremor in her voice. Hank smiled, clapping a reassuring hand on the side of her craft. "I'll be watching your back, Mara. Make sure you watch mine." As the pilots climbed into their cockpits, a cacophony of clanging metal, hissing hydraulics, and final system checks filled the hangar. One by one, the fighters rolled forward, the bombers powered up their heavy engines, and the gunships loaded their last supplies of ammunition. Hank entered his own ship, a heavily modified bomber that housed the mission's critical payload, a nuclear-tipped torpedo. As he settled into the pilot's seat, the weight of his upcoming task settled around him like a cloak. He fired up the engines, feeling the familiar thrum of power that coursed through the ship, a small comfort amidst the swirling chaos of his emotions. The fleet assembled in formation just outside the asteroid belt, the ships aligning for the jump to hyperspace. As the coordinates were set, the final checks completed, Hank's voice came over the comms, steady and clear. "This is it. Keep tight and watch each other's backs. We jump on my mark." A collective breath seemed to be held across the fleet. Then, with a burst of blinding light, the ships disappeared from the asteroid field, hurtling through hyperspace toward their target. The jump was brief, a moment of surreal calm before the storm. As the ships emerged from hyperspace, the immense silhouette of the Justice loomed ahead, bristling with armaments and guarded by its own fleet of fighters. Hank's heart clenched as he beheld the enemy ship, a monstrous vessel that had rained death upon countless innocents. His grip tightened on the controls, the old anger and sorrow burning in his chest as memories of past battles, lost friends, and the very reason for his fight flashed through his mind. Beside him in formation, he could see the other ships, each pilot an echo of his own resolve. They were not just a fleet of ships, they were a vengeful storm gathered from the far reaches of the galaxy, united by a common cause and a shared understanding of the sacrifices required. As they approached the Justice, the quiet of space around them belied the chaos to come. Hank's voice once again came over the comms, calm yet commanding. "Stay sharp, everyone. Remember why we're here. For those we've lost, for those we can still save. Let's show them what justice truly means." The final moments before the battle were a tense quiet, each pilot alone with their thoughts, their fears, and their determination. Hank looked out at the vastness of space, at the ship that represented so much pain and tyranny, and steeled himself for the battle ahead. In the silence of his cockpit, with the stars as his witnesses, Hank made a silent vow to see the mission through, no matter the cost. Today, the Justice would fall, and with it, a blow would be struck against the dark heart of the People's Republic. As Hank's fleet emerged from hyperspace, the colossal form of the Justice dominated the view ahead, its dark hull bristling with gun turrets and missile launchers, an imposing fortress against the backdrop of stars. Almost immediately, alarms blared within Hank's cockpit, signaling the rapid approach of enemy fighters, sleek, deadly crafts that darted forward to intercept the rebel fleet. Without hesitation, Hank plunged into the fray, his hands steady on the controls as he maneuvered his bomber through the chaotic battlefield. The space around them erupted into a lethal ballet of swirling dogfights, the void punctuated by the brilliant flashes of laser fire and the destructive blooms of exploding starfighters. Hank's experience as a pilot shone through as he twisted and dived through the debris of shattered ships, his movements precise and calculated. His eyes constantly scanned his surroundings, anticipating enemy movements, always thinking 2 steps ahead. Around him, his squadron engaged the enemy, their ships weaving a tapestry of defiance with every turn and spiral. The dogfight intensified as the elite squadron of the Justice joined the battle, their fighters more agile and heavily armed. One enemy ace, in particular, seemed to single out Hank, his ship a blur of silver that sliced through space with lethal grace. The ace was relentless, his shots a near constant threat that Hank narrowly evaded time and again. Hank pushed his ship to its limits, the engines whining in protest as he executed a tight spiral to dodge a barrage of laser fire. The cockpit shook violently, a direct hit grazing the armor plating of his bomber. Warning lights flashed, and Hank gritted his teeth, feeling the heat of the near miss. "Focus," Hank muttered to himself, swinging his bomber around to face his pursuer. He fired a series of shots, the green energy bolts slicing through space towards the enemy ace. The pilot dodged with an impressive barrel roll, but Hank was already moving, predicting the maneuver. The battle raged on, each pilot of Hank's fleet fighting with a blend of desperation and skill. Despite their bravery, the cost was evident. Hank's heart sank with each explosion that signified the loss of another rebel fighter. The communications channel was a cacophony of shouts, orders, and static, the sounds of a fight teetering on the edge of despair. As Hank continued to duel with the enemy ace, he became vaguely aware of a distress call from one of his wingmen. Swallowing his frustration, Hank made a split-second decision. He feinted a daring maneuver, luring the ace into a debris field. The risky move paid off. The enemy pilot, focused intently on Hank, failed to avoid a large fragment of a destroyed bomber. The collision was fatal, the ace's ship erupting into a fiery ball of wreckage. Breathing heavily, Hank glanced around to assess the situation. His squadron had managed to thin the enemy's numbers significantly, but the Justice loomed largely untouched, a testament to its formidable defenses. Knowing the mission's success hinged on their next move, Hank rallied his pilots. "All wings, regroup. We make our run now," he commanded, his voice cutting through the chaos. His gaze fixed on the Justice, Hank prepared for the most crucial part of their assault, the bombing run that would either break the enemy or break them. As his squadron formed up, flying in tight formation towards the daunting target, Hank felt a surge of grim determination. This was the moment of truth, the culmination of their sacrifice and courage. The battle among the stars had brought them to this point, and now they faced the heart of darkness itself. The battle was reaching its crescendo as Hank's bomber hurtled towards the Justice, dodging debris and laser blasts with dwindling luck. His ship's hull bore the scars of the brutal dogfight, systems warning of critical damage as yet another volley from the Justice's fighters homed in. Just as the situation seemed dire, with Hank's maneuvers growing increasingly desperate, a sleek, unmarked fighter cut across the battlefield, its guns blazing a path through Hank's pursuers. Recognition dawned on Hank as he identified the ship's markings. The rogue pilot was none other than Maya, a formidable pilot from his past whose unpredictable nature was as legendary as her flying skills. "Thought you could use a hand," Hank, her voice crackled over the comm, charged with adrenaline. "Maya, you're a sight for sore eyes," Hank replied, his spirits lifting. With renewed vigor, he adjusted his trajectory, aligning for the final bombing run. The squadron rallied around the unexpected ally, their formation tightening as they pierced through the weakening defenses of the Justice. Maya's arrival shifted the tide, her aggressive tactics disorienting the enemy fighters long enough for Hank to focus on his critical task. He armed the nuclear-tipped torpedo, the weapons control panel glowing ominously beside him. His target was the massive engines of the Justice, the ship's Achilles heel that, if destroyed, would cripple the behemoth. As they approached the capital ship, Hank's hands were steady, even as his heart pounded a relentless beat. He released the torpedo, watching as it streaked across the space between him and the Justice, a deadly harbinger of destruction. Seconds stretched into eternity until the torpedo found its mark, detonating with a blinding explosion that rocked the very fabric of space. The impact was catastrophic. The Justice's engines erupted, the explosion cascading through its power systems, effectively paralyzing the colossal ship. Lights flickered and died, leaving the ship adrift in a sudden, eerie silence broken only by the chaos of the ongoing battle. Seizing the moment of disarray among the enemy ranks, Hank rallied his pilots. "All units, push forward. This is our chance," he ordered, leading the charge. The rebel fighters swarmed the crippled Justice, their lasers and missiles hammering the vulnerable ship. Amidst the fray, Hank maneuvered his damaged bomber through the debris field created by the explosion, each movement calculated to avoid further damage while maximizing their offensive. The Justice's hull began to fracture under the relentless assault, critical systems failing as secondary explosions blossomed across its surface. Maya's fighter danced through the enemy lines with lethal grace, picking off Justice's turrets and fighters that tried to mount a defense. Together they cut through the remaining resistance, a duo of destruction that left no doubt of the battle's outcome. Finally, with one last concerted barrage from the remaining rebel ships, the Justice gave a shuddering groan as its core went critical. The explosion that followed was a cathartic release of energy, the ship disintegrating into a million pieces of twisted metal and unfulfilled tyrannies. As the debris of the once dreaded capital ship drifted away into space, Hank and his fleet regrouped, the silence of their comms a stark contrast to the frenzied communications just moments before. They had done it, the Justice was no more. Breathing heavily, Hank looked around at his squadron, their ships battered but unbroken. "We've struck a blow they won't forget," he declared, pride mingling with exhaustion in his voice. As they set a course back to their hidden base, the adrenaline of the fight began to ebb, leaving behind the fatigue of battle and the toll of their victory. But for Hank, the fight was personal, and as he piloted his ship through the stars, the cost of their success weighed heavily on him. They had won, but at what price? As the adrenaline faded, he felt an ominous tightness in his chest, a foreboding sign of the sacrifice he had made to ensure their mission's success. The remnants of the rebel fleet made their slow, solemn journey back to the hidden base, each ship carrying the weight of victory and loss through the silence of space. The Justice had been destroyed, its tyranny ended in a spectacular blaze that would ripple through the cosmos, but the cost was written in the gaps within their formation spaces where comrades should have been. As they docked at the base, relief crews rushed to tend to the wounded and repair the battered ships. Hank disembarked from his bomber, his steps unsteady not just from the fatigue of battle, but from a deeper malaise that clung to his bones. The medical team, upon examining him, quickly surmised the grim reality the proximity to the nuclear blast had exposed him to lethal levels of radiation. In the medical bay, as the stark white lights flickered overhead, Hank lay on a cot, the hustle of medics and the murmur of concerned voices a distant echo to his fading senses. His crew, along with Maya and other pilots who had flown with him, gathered around, their faces etched with worry and unspoken grief. Hank's voice, when he spoke, was a hoarse whisper, yet each word carried the strength of his unwavering conviction. "Don't mourn for me," he said, his gaze lingering on each of the faces around him. This was the price to strike a blow they couldn't ignore. "We've ignited something today, something bigger than any one of us." Maya, her eyes brimming with tears, took his hand. "You've led us to this, Hank. You've given us hope where there was none. We'll carry on for you for all those we lost." Hank smiled faintly, a sense of peace settling over his worn features. "Keep fighting," he murmured. "Don't let this fire go out. As long as you keep fighting, I'll never truly be gone." As the life ebbed slowly from him, the pilots and crew members stood in silent vigil, honoring the man who had led them through darkness to deliver a crippling blow to the heart of their oppressors. In his final moments, Hank's thoughts drifted to the memories of battles fought, of laughter shared under starlit skies, of the quiet moments of resolve that had defined his journey. His last breath was a sigh of contentment, a man reconciled with his fate, assured that his sacrifice had not been in vain. After Hank passed, the base held a memorial, the hangar bay filled with those who had known him, who had flown beside him. Stories were shared, not just of the battle they had just won, but of the many small acts of courage and kindness that had defined Hank's life. His leadership had changed the course of their fight, had shown them that even in the face of overwhelming odds, they had the power to challenge tyranny. The ceremony concluded with a pledge spoken by all who gathered there to continue the fight for freedom, to honor Hank's legacy by completing the mission he had given everything to achieve. The rebellion would go on, its flames stoked by the memory of their fallen leader, each pilot and crew member carrying a piece of Hank's spirit into every battle. As the pilots returned to their ships, ready to continue the fight in new skies, they carried with them the lessons Hank had taught, that courage was not the absence of fear, but the triumph over it, that sacrifice was necessary for the greater good, and that even in death, a rebel's spirit could still inspire victory. In the void left by the destruction of the Justice, a new feeling, one of hope, formed among the stars, a hope that freedom would one day reign across the galaxy once again. Hank Henry's name would be remembered, not just as a pilot or a hero, but as a beacon of the enduring fight for liberty. Thank you so much for watching. Be sure to check out all of the other videos on my channel. I'll see you in the next one. Thank you all for the comments, subscribes, and likes.